We are here to talk about a very exciting collaboration between Theater Under the Stars and Houston Ballet on the upcoming production of Oklahoma. So let's give that a round of applause. For those folks who were here for the film screening that we did a couple weeks ago, one of the things that Dan and I were talking about was that I like to start, I started that event and I will start this event by thanking all of you who followed us all around Houston on our hometown tour over this past year. So we really appreciate that. But as you know, Stanton did an amazing job of making lemonade out of lemons, putting beautiful performances in Not the Wortham Theater. Yeah, and so what he did, so you should give him a round of applause for that. But another exciting thing that came out of that was Dan and Stanton connecting, and I'm sure that they'll tell us more about those details. And I mean, you know, artistically. And then Jessica and Chris spent a good amount of time dancing over at the Hobby. So we used the hometown tour to get ready for this moment, which is these two amazing organizations coming together. And I'll just take a second to brag that I got to watch a tiny bit of rehearsal, and it's so exciting. So look forward to it. Yes, keep clapping, it's great. To my left is Dan Connectus, who's the artistic director of Theater Under the Stars. And Stanton Welch, who's our artistic director. So I guess I should be clear. Stanton is our artistic director, but if you don't know, which I think you do, that he is the choreographer for Oklahoma. Yes, okay, great. We've got a good crowd tonight. And to his left is Jessica Collado, who you know as a principal dancer of Houston Ballet. And you will soon know her as Dream Laurie, which is exciting. And to her left is Chris Coomer, soloist with Houston Ballet, soon to be known as Dream Judd. But, oh, no, not Boo. We're going to talk about that because Stanton has a different take. So I wanted to talk a lot because I know I have a dance nerd crowd out there. Quite a bit about the dance of Oklahoma and ballet and its relationship with Broadway. So I thought I'd start by just talking about sort of the state of Broadway and ballet's relationship with it right before Oklahoma. And I know I can get this to work. So the photos I have up there are of George Balanchine, and our crowd knows him mostly for ballets like the Four Temperaments or Serenade or Jules. I mean, we have a huge number of his ballets in our repertory. But in 1936, before the New York City Ballet was what it is today, he was making a living doing all kinds of different things, choreographing for the Siegfried Follies and choreographing on Broadway. So in these images, you see him, the cast on the left-hand side, the original cast members in his version of Slaughter on 10th Avenue. And then to the right, like a lot of choreographers do, he brought excerpts of the ballet part of that into the New York City Ballet's repertory in 1968. So when Agnes de Mille choreographed her ballet, was asked to choreograph her ballet Rodeo for the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo in 1942, we think of her as a Broadway, or at least I do, think of her a lot as a Broadway person, but in fact, she was a ballet choreographer first. So she choreographed Rodeo with music by Aaron Copland, which, whether you know that ballet, you certainly know that music. I'm sure the symphony plays it almost every year in its suite form. And actually, Oscar Hammerstein and Richard Rodgers were in the audience for that. And seeing her ballet is what gave them the idea to have her choreograph Oklahoma. So I just sort of wanted to set the stage in New York for this discussion. Rodgers and Hammerstein invited her to be a part of it. Sorry. Dan, the other night at the Spotlight event, I'm going to start with you because you said that you were a huge fan of Agnes de Mille. And huge. So I wanted to have you tell us a little bit why.
Okay, well.
I don't think you're on.
I'm training to project, so. Actually, the real reason is sort of, this is going to be my dance nerd moment, which is I read her very first book that I'm forgetting the title of, her autobiography. It's back here. I'm having a senior moment, but it'll come out. And her, for me, it was the first person who was in dance, writing about dance, that understood it on a completely true base level, and talking about being an artist and her interactions and her struggles to become a respected choreographer, which that's really what I wanted to be growing up. It's how I started, basically. And her struggles to get out of the shadow of her family. Her uncle was Cecil B. DeMille, which I'm sure some of us might know who that was. And so her family was in show business. She choreographed a movie of Romeo and Juliet that Norma Shear played Juliet in, and I'm forgetting who Romeo was. He might have been Australian.
No, it was the guy that plays Ashley from Juliet. Yeah.
Oh, yes, who died in World War II, I think, in a plane crash. Anyways, but that was in the early-ish 30s, and then she went to London to study, incidentally, I think alongside Tudor and a couple of others, and nobody wanted to cast her because, as you can tell from this picture, that does not look like a dancer. Or one of that we would consider. She was a little bit zaftig, as we would say, and she also was. Now it's a little more. It's given a little more respect, but she didn't take anything from anybody. She was very headstrong, and I thought that's very much like me. Even though I'm not a woman, but I identified with her so much, and so that was my intro to her.
Her grit.
And her writing and her grit. But then my very first choreography job, I was hired to choreograph at College Light Opera Company, which is on Cape Cod. It's 1 week summer stock. And incidentally, the director of one of the first shows was Kevin Moriarty, who's directing Oklahoma. And one of the music directors was Kimberly Grigsby of this very first thing. But the guy who hired me is F. Paul Driscoll, who is the editor now of Opera News. But back then, he was known as a ballet historian. He knows so much about dance, and he took me under his wing and said, let's go to the ballet. And I saw Fall River Legend, and I was like, that is one of the most thrilling pieces of theater and choreography, dance theater, that I've seen, even though it's very steeped in like 40s, 50s, modern psychology and views. It was so thrilling to see this accused woman, and the curtain goes down, and she's facing her demons, and the curtain slowly goes up, and there's a gallows where she turns around, and the strings are going, and she just slowly walks up as the curtain goes down, and you're like, well, that says it all.
Well, I mean, she worked a lot with Martha Graham, and I think that idea that the human body can tell a story is a big part of the story in Oklahoma, too.
Yeah.
So before we get to that part, I thought if you pass the mic to Stanton, he can talk a little bit. I mean, do you have a relationship in your experience as a choreographer with DeMille at all, or?
We did Fall of the River Legend in Australia, so I danced in it, and certainly Rodeo is one of my favourite ballets to watch. Yeah, but that's as close. I mean, of course, I didn't meet her or anything, and they were the two most famous ballets, and both of them were in Australia. Yeah.
All right, so Oklahoma is celebrating its 75th birthday this year, which is one of the reasons you selected it. And so we think of it, I mean, all of us in this audience think of Oklahoma as a classic. But in fact, it was really considered the Hamilton of its day. And I thought I have an image up of the play on which it was based, as well as Rodgers and Hammerstein. And I wondered, Dan, if you could tell us a little bit about the why was it so groundbreaking and different in its day?
Well, in that era, in the basically both Hammerstein and Rogers were coming out of the 20s and 30s when they wrote musicals. Oscar Hammerstein had written a small show you might have heard of called Showboat, which was in 1928, I believe. So it was some years before this. But he had faced many years of not having any sort of success. And Richard Rogers, on the other hand, had plenty of success in the 30s with Larry Hart, his other partner, of which Balanchine choreographed not only
Babes in Arms.
he choreographed Babes in Arms, Boys from Syracuse.
Yep, and there's one more.
And Where Slaughter Comes From.
I Married an
On
Angel.
Your Toes. Oh, so there's four. On Your Toes, and then I Married an Angel. And Boys from Syracuse, incidentally, has 3 ballets in it. I actually choreographed it in a production, and it was just thrilling because you get all of this dance music. Anyways, so Rogers had a very successful career, but Larry Hart was an alcoholic, and sadly, it interfered with his work, and Rogers turned to Oscar Hammerstein, who he knew because they both were at Columbia together. Oscar Hammerstein had been there before him, but they knew through that collaboration. However, when they were working in the 20s and 30s, Showboat might have been an exception, but most of the shows opened with chorus girls coming out and dancing. And at that point, you know, showing your knee was pretty risque. And they were all singing in unison, probably not a very complicated dance, and definitely not very emotional or deep. And you probably already knew what was going to happen to the plot within the first 5 minutes. And the difference here, or one of the main differences, is that Oklahoma does not start that way. It starts the way the play starts. The play is Green Grow the Lilacs, which incidentally, I just find this so interesting, is Lynn Riggs, L-Y-N-N. For many years I thought was a woman. Incidentally, it's a man who is part Cherokee, grew up in Oklahoma, wrote this play as part of the WPA Works Project, but was a gay Indian cowboy and became an expat and lived in Paris at the time Oklahoma happened. And Richard Rogers saw a revival of Green Grow the Lilacs at Westport County Playhouse. This was several years after the Broadway premiere, which didn't do very well. And he said, oh, I think this would make a good musical. And the original producers of it, the Theater Guild, bought the rights for Richard Rogers and Larry Hart. At the same time, Oscar Hammerstein had reread the play, said, I think this would make a good musical, I want the rights. He couldn't get them. Cut to 2 months later, Richard Rogers called him and said, let's do it. But to get to your point, the original play opened with a woman churning butter on stage and a man singing a folk song off stage and would come on. So not only did the show not start with a gaggle of chorus girls on stage dancing, it started with an old woman on stage churning butter and a guy off stage singing. You don't even see him until far in. So it already broke convention and stayed, and the whole show, there was not one point that a number took a turn and became something off narrative, whether it is in the instance of the Dream Ballet is all story. So, and by story, it doesn't mean this happened and this happened and this happened. What it really means, to me at least, and I'm sure Stanton can correct me, but I think it means emotional story and psychological story.
So dance as part of the as a storyteller and not as a moment to stop in and get entertained. And that, as we were saying about Agnes de Mille, is also her strength, whether she was choreographing for ballet, for modern dance, or
And the other thing that I want to go back to, one ballet that I went to the library in New York that I saw of hers that really made me really want to be her, is she choreographed this ballet called Three Virgins and a Devil. I think that's the title. Yeah. That Michael Kidd was one of the original devils, and she choreographed it on Jerome Robbins. And it is so funny, and the devil is playing this flute, and the virgins are thrusting and going. It's so funny, and her sense of humor and comedic timing is brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, I think she felt committed to, and everything you read about her, that dance was, and I think that's in that same era when modern dance was really coming to be, that we're an art form in and of ourselves. We don't need all these other, we can be as dramatic or as funny as anything else. So you alluded to the dance being used differently in this production. And Stanton, you were mentioning, I think most of us are familiar with that 1955 movie where the dance is still a big part of it, but that you're actually incorporating, going back to how de Mille had more dance incorporated into each number. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so within the structure of the musical, there are 5 ballet or dance sections. Tell me if I'm wrong.
No.
Okay, great. But there are 5, and there's musical interludes, which is, I think, what you're talking about. And so each of those has the singing stops, and then there's a dance section, and then it comes back, with the exception of the Dream Ballet, which is entirely just orchestration and just 20 minutes, I think. Yeah. It can be 25, we can go slower. So that is unique, and then there's all these other sections, parts of songs like It's a Scandal, for example, and there are waltzing in and out and interlude music. So in the film, they've actually cut a lot of what Agnes de Mille had done out of the film. You still see the sections, but they're at a train station. There's no train station in Oklahoma, really. So those things, he's not dancing on the train, so yeah, that's what's missing. That's what I think is.
And do you feel like in the dancing section of the musical numbers that you are, as a choreographer, contributing to who the characters are and what the story is?
Well, no, we made a very deliberate, different decision. So the Dream Curly and the Dream Judd and the Dream Laurie are in all of Act 1. They're not just in the Dream. So right from the beginning of the musical, Laurie and Judd and Curly have these other creatures, these spirit animals of themselves that can express the emotion that they can't express. So Curly doesn't say much, Judd doesn't say much, and Laurie sort of says the opposite of what she feels all the time. So what the dancers can do is show you what they're really thinking and feeling inside. If you want to run over and hug someone and kiss them and tell them you love them, but then how we really behave is not that way. And she may sit and be colder to him. So it was a nice way of playing with that. And we made that decision so that the audience and everybody was familiar with these people. And we also made the decision that the dreamers can see their opposite. So Laurie actively acts with her dream version of herself as though they're having a conversation. So that's all very different. And then for the Dream Ballet, there is the script inside the script of the ballet, what they wanted from the ballet, and we've not done that exactly either. The choice was very much that Laurie would make the decision that when you meet Judd, Judd is not often, I haven't done Oklahoma before. So when we went and auditioned it in New York, lots of Judds came in who were heavy men in their late 40s who really sung and were great.
So the other thing that I find interesting on this is that the ballet is called Laurie Makes Up Her Mind. And normally Judd is played by what I call somebody who is, well, at least what my folks would say is a sandwich shy of a picnic. and not very not very attractive.
Yeah.
And in not just physically, but also mentally.
Shrek.
Yeah. Yeah. Although he's lovable. He's lovable. But anyways, go ahead.
So there was no choice for me then with Laurie. Why was she there's no choice. Curly's clearly the choice and Judd's the disaster. And we wanted to change that idea, and Kevin came in very much with that idea, and I love that idea, and I like the women to make the decisions themselves. So for us, Judd is actually really a sexy, muscular guy. He just doesn't care to muck around with the other guys. He's intense, he's isolated, he's got his own work ethic, his own job. He's not someone who converses easily with people. But that doesn't make him bad. It's just he's different. And then Curly, who's everyone's best friend, is kind of beige. He can't make the decisions. He's who she wants to be with, but he doesn't have any spice. He doesn't have any flavour. So then the choice of hers, because in the story, if you're not sure of it, she chooses to go to the picnic with Judd to spite Curly. And that's what makes the whole story go south. She does something kind of mean, and she uses Judd to get at the guy she really likes, and it all backfires, and that gives me goosebumps. That's the Shakespeare part of it, because she accidentally does this thing that we've all can see unfold, and then Judd is the victim, and then when he does become aggressive and he does go too far and does turn nasty, it motivates him, and it gives Laurie also, when he dies, this guilt and this real emotion, a people emotion, not fairy story. She was partly responsible for his death. Had she not have invited him to the party and stirred the pot, they'd have both all been fine at the end of the day. So that's what's good drama, when it doesn't make sense and you make just mistakes and it's all a mess.
But
it's like real life.
But it has an element of realism, whereas your point is with the other Judd, there's no way. Right. It's just all spite, not any attraction. So what I was reading about the dream ballets, and that's in fact what there's a dream inside of Slaughterhouse on 10th Avenue. There's dreams in a lot of musicals at that time, and I guess that's when everyone's interest in Freud and the subconscious and all that.
Storytelling, ballet, Bayadere, all those, we used it too before musical theatre. So it was part of a way of storytelling. So you could say, this woman who is really scared and never does anything in her dreams feels like this, but now we're back to here. So it was a good way of showing the inside of a character.
Do you want to speak to that at all, Jessica? First, I would like you to talk a little bit, both of you, I guess, about that relationship with your singing self. The other.
I met her today, finally. Her name's Olivia, and she's lovely.
We haven't put it together.
Oh, okay. So what's going? Yeah. So get ready. Do you under? So I guess the question about Laurie, who is she to you? What are you? Expound upon her from your perspective.
That's a hard question. I would say that when we're on stage together, we have this connection. Like we're thinking the same thoughts. I'm almost like the little person on her shoulder, her conscience, like thinking about both choices, and maybe it's the dream Laurie that then ventures and tries to see how it would be with both guys. But as far as like how much we interact on stage yet, I'm not quite.
No, but I mean just Laurie, the character herself, how you embody her, who she.
I can relate to her a little bit. She is a flirty girl. I think that she definitely is a strong woman. I mean, it's just her and her Aunt Ella on the farm, and I think she wants to find love, but she wants it. I don't know. I think she wants to be like swept off her feet and have it be magical, and it doesn't exactly work out that way, or happen that way for her.
She realizes that that's actually not the reality.
Right.
And she teases him all the time. So a lot of their relationship is like they grew up together, they're best friends, they're non-sexual friends, and they constantly poke and tease. And this is the end of that poking and teasing. That's what I think is so interesting in the songs and the music. It's always they tease one another, and then the teasing goes too far. So that's the story.
And that's when she turns to Judd.
Right.
Okay, so Chris, what about Judd for you? What do you?
I mean, I love the whole concept of the Dream Ballet. I love reading and, I mean, even movies and stuff. I feel like in a book or in a script, it's very easy to kind of get that point across of like, well, they may not act this way, but this is what they're really thinking. So yeah, I love that idea of this. We get to give you that, you know, although they're acting this way towards each other and they may be not necessarily mean, but they kind of, yeah, they are really feeling this way. So I think that's kind of a very unique thing to do. So that's kind of my take on the dream Judd, is I am everything that's in his head that he can't get out, you know.
Because he's shy or not?
Shy. I mean, he's got a past. He doesn't know how to verbalize it. He really sees her as someone who's above him, which kind of adds a lot to that resentment too, I guess. You know, it's so close and it's his dream girl, but he can't tell her that. He he's got all this pent up anger, and it goes too far. He sees that he's finally taken advantage of, I guess, and that's what, like, everything, all that, all that stuff that he's been thinking in his head, it's justified then. So that's what really pushes him over the edge, and yeah.
And one of the things Kevin talks about, which I think is interesting, and I'll try to make it the PG-13 version of that, but so there's a parallel to modern life, because Judd in the story he's in his room with pornography all the time, and he's locked himself away, and he doesn't want to deal with real people. He's just dealing with this life on the phone, or in that case in the smokehouse, so that he's completely removed from socially dealing with people. And then a popular girl who's everyone's friend coerces him out of his world to trust her with that moment, to go to this function where he's sure she's going to make fun of him and embarrass him, and she does, kind of. And that's so interesting, I think, with today's world, with everyone on their phones and the terrible things people say to one another with no consequence for what you say. That's what I think. It's powerful that his description. That's why I like Judd. It made sense to me. Yeah, he's an odd guy, but he also gets really tortured in this.
He gets brave enough to come out, and then it's just as bad as he thought it was.
Then he gets killed, yeah. And I mean, what he does that is bad, you see in the dream, but he doesn't actually do that. So, you know, she dreams he takes her, rapes her, but he doesn't do that. And then she's reacting to her dream of him, but how awful that is for him. He just took her to this dance, and now she doesn't want to touch him, and you got to go through all...
And in the end, they're really... these are adults that are sitting to your left, but in fact, and they're kids, and it's just so real.
It's Romeo and Juliet, it is. It's 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds.
Yeah, who haven't fully...
The old guy, Judd's like 24, you know.
Right.
We're all older now. So.
All right, so I guess I want to talk a little bit about the difference with the three of you about, I mean, you two have had a lot of experience working with Stanton as a ballet choreographer, and I wonder if you want to articulate, and also for you, Stanton, you've done tons of ballets, but this is your first musical, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so how is the approach, or is the approach different in the rehearsal process?
I think for us, it is not so different because we started separate from the actors and singers. And we do, as we do for Sylvia or Romeo or Marie, we block out stuff similar to actors where it's an emotional reaction. So I feel like we build the characters and then we add steps. So that's not dissimilar. Singing is a little dissimilar. Making noise, that's interesting. You get punched, you can go, ugh. We get punched and we don't make noise. So those sort of things are interesting, and we're only just starting to discover that. The ladies haven't been in the rehearsal with the actors yet. The men had it the first time, literally 20 minutes ago when we were all just upstairs, was their first time. So you go through a bit of a shock. I mean, I went through it. It's different. Suddenly people are talking all the time and around you, and they're talking and you're trying to act, and yeah, that's different.
So how was that today, Chris?
I got to kind of see a bit of rehearsal on Sunday as well. Myself and Ian kind of went and interacted. And it's definitely a different vibe, if you will, in the studio. Like I was saying, you're in a dance studio, and even if someone's not doing, like in the middle of the floor, whatever's going on, like they're always on the side, and they'll be stretching or staying warm or doing their exercises that they've been given, or talking, yeah. But it was just interesting to see, like, the studio was lined with chairs, and everyone was just sitting and watching,
and I think they were so surprised to see you today. I think, right? I think the actors sat because they...
Oh, no, they wanted to be there because we don't get in musical theater, we sometimes get one or two dancers of your caliber, but we don't get 21. I mean, that's riches beyond, and I know I'm gonna cry opening night. I can't wait. And they were too. I mean, everybody was sitting there amazed, and I just felt I needed to go on a diet after watching all these attractive people.
So, but for you, Chris, in the actual choreography, when Stanton's I guess both creating the choreography on you guys without the actors there, and then today when he's working because today was a weaving everybody together day. How does that feel in addition to the climate, but just sort of the choreographic process?
Like Stanton was saying, it's very different for us to be able to make sound. I know personally, I definitely struggle with that today. You know, you react to something. Like we're used to the acting side of it, and you know, someone does something, and this is where I laugh, or this is how I feel about. I'm ashamed at this part. But to be able to like verbally kind of state that, or you know, he says something, and to like question him like during his song, I was like, that's just like, but in dance terms, I guess that's the same for us to be like, okay, well, you're over here, you have 2/8 to walk around the back, and before you start your next dance thing, naturally we're like, okay, well, I can do this, but for them, it's the speaking side of it. They're like, this is the song, you can interject, you can talk, as long as you obviously don't interrupt them while they're doing it. But it was very.
So when you're like on the side as part of the crowd, you can.
Well, when you say hi. Hey, how are you? Like when you walk out.
Well, they're saying like Kansas City is like it's so modern and stuff, and everyone's like, how modern? Like, you know, like talking to it. And like usually like someone's doing a solo and you like don't move, you don't distract. Like that's their time. But no.
The actors are always trying to.
Add layers.
Yeah.
Like Shrek with the onions, you know?
It's being confident in your voice, and I think that's something we don't really do. And I kind of figured that out when we did West Side Story a few years ago. It's just talking and being able to be loud enough, which I struggle with, but just to make it sound confident, because we just don't talk on stage, really.
I feel like even West Side Story, it's like you had your lines, and this is where you say them, which is very kind of almost what we do for a lot of our stuff. It's like these are our steps, and you have counts, and unless it's improv, obviously. But yeah, to just be able to like improv speaking as well, like, it's very there's like a different.
Your words come out all backwards.
Yeah, you're like, no, that wasn't a good one. No, sorry.
And for the dancers here, we did. Chris and Ian did the fight with me with you guys on Sunday. And there's a fist fight in the end of Act 2, and we have to choreograph that. So the dancers were immediately great with all the reaction to the volume and speaking and how you speak when you're being beaten. But what they couldn't understand, which we could understand, was where the transfer of your weight was, so you could fall and not be on your knife and do the same thing every time. So it's interesting to see which part of the brain each of us have developed. So we can talk in shorthand. You need to go down, put your weight on your back of your foot, blah, 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 and you'll fall on the knife and it won't hurt you. Where that was a myth to them, but we couldn't understand how they were making up the words and remembering where the words were in the same time. So, and then there's singing too, which is beautiful.
So I guess that was I mean, I saw a little teeny bit of the integration of the actors and dancers, but you're expecting to integrate these non-Houston Ballet movers into the sections as well. How is that?
Oh yeah, I mean they're in it. They're all in the whole show. I mean, there's not much of the show. The cowboys aren't on stage for sure. The ladies are in a lot of it, but they're in all of Act 1 and all of Act 2 and all integrated. Sorry, what was the question?
Well, just that I mean, not only do Chris and Jessica and the rest of the dancers have to use their voices and integrate in the acting parts, the actors have to integrate into the dancing part.
Yeah, and it depends.
I mean, you have these guys, and how do you make?
Well, it depends. Like, you know, immediately they move. We had the lady that's playing Ado Annie, if I'm saying that correct.
Yeah.
And Madeline, and she and Chris met on Sunday, and I taught her the two-step, which everyone can do. This is not a ballet step. And she got that pretty quickly. So, I mean, actors are often can be quite physical. It's just the right person in the right place. I mean, then there's someone who's like Dewey, who plays Cord or Carnes, and he's the one that was so fantastic at those ad-libbing little...
I love him.
He's hysterical. But immediately he joined in the dance, made a joke of what he was doing, and it's in the dance because it's funny that he starts with them and then realizes, I don't want to do this because it's too hard, and goes to the side. But that's how you integrate it. You got to bring your strength. If you're a great actor, find the thing that relates to that and let me put it into the dance. And the same thing for the dancers, that they have to bring things.
You as the creator, I think also it's you have to be open to the thing that happens in the room. Yeah. The Balanchine story of Serenade, right? Like that girl coming in late. Oh, it's a myth. Oh, rats. Well, but same idea that like a mistake happens and that's the gold.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's deja vu, but these two were with me a few weeks ago, and we were talking about some other ballet where partnering is that same thing. It's a series of mistakes. So often as a choreographer or a director, what you're really doing is problem solving constantly. You come in with your plan, and your plan dismantles in a few seconds, and then you're trying to find the way, constantly churning a few steps ahead of where they're up to, a few beats ahead. Not much. Sometimes you're right together. But it really is. And so lifting, or what we're talking about, so starting the men's dance, this actor being very funny on the side, noticing that, bringing it in, you know, that's what you're talking about.
You're creating you have plans, but you're creating on the bodies and the people you have.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when they look good, we look good.
Do you want to say anything else about, I guess, Jessica and Chris, about the dancing? We've talked about the process of learning these steps, but about the difference in the kind of choreography you're doing. Is it? I mean, does it feel familiar? Does it feel?
I mean, I think it's a little bit of the period and catered towards the style of Oklahoma. I think when it comes to like our paw work and stuff like that, I think we're trying to channel an emotion more so and trying to tell the story, and that's kind of driving the movement, I would say.
And I mean, I think the only thing that's really, I mean, it's dance. They're just more stylized, so it's
in boots.
Yeah, that's the main thing for me. We got
boots and hats.
We got the hats on. We got the cowboy boots the whole time. Yeah.
Hats on the forehead.
Yeah.
So it's just, once again, just problem solving those little
I'm sure there are a few cowboys in the audience who know how to kiss a girl with a hat on.
All the different ways a hat can be emotional. Yeah. That when it's back or when it's forward or how you sit, this is too small for you. But your hat is as much of an acting tool in choreography than anything. And we had a long conversation for Curly about that, when he's frustrated or when he's waiting and how he's looking. Your hat can be a part of it. And the boot for the men, you know, is a normal cowboy boot, and you can fall in those boots. I fell the other day. You can slide on them. There's something about the rubber that can make you fly across the stage.
My heel snapped off today during rehearsal.
Yeah. Well, and the ladies are actually on point, which was great, because it was the first thing that we talked about, because I wanted to know, because that really changes for the ladies. But by putting them on point, I can give Jess and Melody and the other ladies all the steps we normally have in big pas de deux like Marie or Sylvia. There was no restriction that way because we had that.
I'm going to open it up to questions in a minute because I know we have some, but I wanted to sort of take a moment because as I bragged already that I got to peek at a little bit of rehearsal. Right next door, in the next rehearsal studio, Justin Peck is doing a world premiere for us, but you may or may not know, so he's coming here as a ballet choreographer, you may or may not know that he also just choreographed Carousel for Broadway. And so I think that there's been a resurgence. I guess I forgot to talk about probably the most important person in musical, the person who did the most crossing over between ballet and musical theater, which of course is Jerome Robbins. So you see Chris there in Fancy Free, which we're doing this year, which is happy birthday to him and 100th birthday to him and Bernstein. Their first collaboration was Fancy Free, which is a ballet that turns into On Our Town, which ultimately, of course, turns into West Side Story, which then turned back into a ballet. So there you go, it's full circle. But also Justin Peck, who's here creating a ballet, just had a show on Broadway. Christopher Wheeldon, who's Carousel, a dance which is technically not a musical but is inspired by a musical, did An American in Paris. And I'm sort of curious.
He also did, he choreographed on Broadway, and now I'm trying, American in Paris, but there was one, Sweet Success. Smell of Success. Sweet Smell of Success? Yes. Marvin Hamlish wrote that score.
So you have this Agnes de Mille and Balanchine and Robbins doing all this theatrical work, and then it kind of disappears. And now we're back, and I wonder, I'm just curious, I mean, if you have a theory about why ballet choreographers are resurging on Broadway at all? Or are we getting more fusey in the way we approach dance?
I think I've said this for years, and now I'm talking to the right audience to say this, because the musical theater audience booed me when I said this. But I don't think anything new is going to come from within our ranks. And I include myself. I was Tony nominated for choreography for Xanadu, but I used steps that everybody knew and I assembled it. And yes, I'm a creative artist, and yes, that takes some sort of talent. But something new, I feel, has to come from somebody who is not lives and breathes musicals all the time, because we use the same tropes, the same storytelling things. Whereas like Stanton comes in and there's like a moment in the Dream Ballet where it's so simple, but the girls are lifted in this cockeyed way that no theater choreographer would have ever come up with or ever have the time to come up with, because in theater, like Stanton said, they were working very far ahead, but in theater, when I did How to Succeed 2 years ago and I choreographed it, I started the day of rehearsal. And I also had to do book scenes while I was choreographing. So it's not a lot of time to develop ideas and things. And that's why I really think when you go to Oklahoma in 1943, you feel like you're not only consuming something that is populist, but it's something that is elevated. It's like something precious or something rarefied. And I feel
because of the dancing.
Yeah, and because it was beyond people's comprehension, or they hadn't seen anything like that. And I feel like part of the thing with Hamilton, I loved that choreography, but it's fusing two different worlds, and it's you doing it in a way that we hadn't seen before. And I think that's the same thing with Justin and Chris and some of the modern choreographers, Sonia Taye, who's been doing she's doing Moulin Rouge. And I know that's not popular to say in musical theater circles, but I really think new ideas can only come from outside of the theater world. And there are exceptions, but and myself included, I don't have any new ideas. I just regurgitate really well.
But also Carousel what did we just say they were? Carousel, Gershwin, which is Chris's piece, American Paris, and then Oklahoma. The scores are so rich and beautiful. These are not scores of electronic music or thinly veiled. This is, you could remove the voice and we could make a ballet of Oklahoma to that exact same music, and it would feel and be just as glorious as Prokofiev and Tchaikovsky and all those things that we feel. So I think that that is an attraction to choreographers, because we only have a finite amount of wonderful storytelling music that exists. There's only, 15 big ballet scores of that, and then you start hearing this stuff, and anything, and opera has it too, but anything that makes you feel so much through music. And, I knew that I loved this score, but sitting in those rehearsals every day and hearing all the little ins and outs that you don't even pay attention to when you're in the show is extraordinary. I mean, it's beautiful ballet dance music.
So you feel like this, taking a musical score has given you something new to work with?
Well, I think that's the attraction for ballet people to those three. You don't see a ballet person in one of the different scores. They're all still in these beautiful, fantastic scores.
And so the newness that you're talking about is what we're going to see. Even though Oklahoma is 75 years old, we're getting a fully new treatment.
For sure.
This fall.
And I also think the approach in the acting and the singing, not so much because you have to be true to the score, but definitely in the acting and the way that it's directed. A lot of people don't really understand what a director does on a musical, which I say, if something goes wrong with the sound, it's the director's fault. If something's wrong with the choreography, it's the director's fault, because they haven't good. Because it's really, especially in musicals, it's the director who is as much an auteur and an author as the authors. And his approach is very modern. It is very #MeToo. It's real. And yeah.
All right.
Sorry, I'm just going to
No, go.
It's another Kevin quote. I'm just quoting Kevin because we've heard the same speeches now. But the thing that is so relevant for Oklahoma for today is the whole emphasis of the play, which I feel very emotional about as we put it together, is the coming together of two tribes. And tribes that disagree with each other, but find a way to bond together and become the state or the United States or the planet Earth or whatever your choice may be to become that. But that's what it's about. So it's the cowmen and the farmers who will never really love each other, but find a way to come together to make something bigger than themselves, bigger than the love of Laurie and Curly, but the state and America and all that kind of stuff. And there's something really inspiring about that, and that's also what's so cool about the dancers with the singers and the actors and the kids, is that these are our tribes all coming together to put on a show, to bring you together, to bring more tribes together. So
that's beautiful. All right, so we're ready for some questions. Yes.
Okay, so you've got two completely different groups coming together, the actors and the dancers. And I presume there's going to be at least two casts of dancers. How does that merge in with the actors, or do you have two casts of actors?
So the question is about casting. It's so common for us always at Houston Ballet, there are multiple casts of a specific ballet. So Susan's asking, there's likely be two casts of dancers, but are there two casts of actors? Or if there are two casts of dancers, how does that work?
it's very unique to ballet that you'd have multiple casts. It's not a normal thing. And also for ballet, that's not that common. So if we make a new ballet, sometimes we won't have more than the first cast do it. It depends on what the exhaustion level is of the ballet. I wanted to have two casts of The Dream, Curly, Judd and Laurie, simply, quite frankly, to get more dancers to have this experience with Dan. And so I was trying to get as many people into the bus as I could to take over. And I thought that So what we do is the three that are the dream three are also, the other three are in the ballet in the other parts, and then we just switch back and forth. So no one really has a night off or separate, but they all get to experience that feeling of this cool
So
thing.
when
that we're
Chris
doing.
isn't Dream Judd, he's something else.
Yeah, and
Okay.
we don't have a name for them. It can, Mike. You can be Mike.
But,
Yeah.
But
as far as the actors go, there's only one set of actors, and that's more the way that we work in regional theater. But on Broadway, they have understudies and swings that can take over if they get sick. But it's an 8-show week for the actors.
yeah, so they have 16 shows
Total.
in total. So that's a lot for us in a short period of time too. So it just felt like it was right. We haven't done this with the actors yet. I think the actors are going to freak out when suddenly it's a different Dream Judd and a different Dream Laurie. They don't know that's coming yet. On Wednesday, Thursday, they'll make that discovery.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So the questions about collaboration is happening on stage with dancers and actors, but what about the orchestra pit?
Well, incidentally, I don't know the exact number, but we have several members that play in our pit who also are members of the ballet orchestra and also members of the symphony and all of that. So they kind of job in and out. For us, we've done some special fundraising around our orchestra because normally we only have 21 pieces. And I say that to you, this crowd, because you're used to huge symphonic orchestras. But in a Broadway pit, for us, 21 is a lot. But we are now going to 24 because we wanted to fulfill what the original orchestration was on Broadway in 1943. Which also we were asking about differences in the sound. This orchestra pit has no saxophones, no swing band, which really in the 30s, early 40s was the thing. And Richard Rodgers wanted to be more like Jerome Kern, who had written Showboat, and make it more symphonic, which Stanton's correct in saying this music is ballet music because of the emphasis on the strings. And that's where our fundraising went to. I'm looking at Amy Lampy right behind you, who has helped raise that money. Goes towards the, yes, please applaud her. Goes to for the money for those strings, so it really gives, for us, richness to that.
Other questions? Yeah.
I'm curious about the traditions of musical theater and the traditions of a ballet company, coming together on stage. Like I think about in ballet, we say good luck, we say mayor. And in musical theater, we say good luck, we say break a leg. Or in ballet, we have, warm-up class. In musical theater, you have vocal warm-up. So when all these things are merging, are you finding kind of new traditions and melding those together?
We have no idea what's going to
Let's
happen.
repeat the question. So the question is about the traditions backstage and in preparation for a show between ballet and musical theater.
I don't think it's as strict as that. I think you'll find that all of us say a different good luck thing, depending on our country and depending on our teachers, and they may overlap. So they may say mad. I say chookers, I don't say mad. Someone might say break a leg. You cross yourself. Toy, toy, toy.
Yeah.
Right?
But that's a fun question. I kind of have a dream that Priscilla Lopez is going to come into your warm-up class and take ballet. Wouldn't that be great? So our Aunt Eller is Priscilla Lopez, who was in the original cast of A Chorus Line, and it was her story that created Nothing, the song that's in the show. And then she was the very first person to sing What I Did for Love. But she was a Broadway chorus girl for many years, a dancer. So I'm
Tony Award winning.
Tony Award winning, and I just think it would be kind of so interesting for those musical theater dancers to get to go and see that. But we'll see what happens. They're a fickle bunch.
I also just think it's like me speaking personally. Like, I mean, we have so much in the arts. We have so much respect for what they do, and I'm sure vice versa for what we do. So I feel like just it's gonna work out. Like no matter what, we'll make space for each other. Like we'll respect each other. Like how they warm up. You know, if they're warming up, we're not gonna sit down and start.
The other interesting thing that we haven't really said is it's not just a collaboration between the companies. It's also our schools, and we have 10 students from our 2 schools, 9 from HSMT, which is the Humphrey School of Musical Theater, and we have 1 student from the River, which is a school for students with disabilities to express themselves through musical theater, and he's going to be in the show along with
10 of our kids from the academy, and that they will all be integrated and dancing and singing and acting.
I hope our kids aren't teaching them to misbehave.
Not,
Yeah.
What do you think is a story that needs to be told, or a great score with a story that would lend itself to future collaborations between Houston Ballet and musical theater?
The question is about what do the artistic directors think is a story that needs to be told, or a score that needs to be collaborated on between TUTS and Houston Ballet?
yeah, there are several, of course. West Side Story is a great one for ballet dancers to do, whether it was the Robins or whether it was a new version. We've talked about a chorus line. I think there are of course, On Your Toes is a great musical that has a lot of great ballet and ballet characters in it. Phantom has a lot of ballet in it. So there's a lot, I think. But certainly you could go through all of this canon, South Pacific, Sound of Music. I mean, there's a lot of...
I also, we're not there quite yet, but part of when I was interviewing for this job, incidentally, my 1-year anniversary is next week. But when I was interviewing, a lot of I preached the choir, or preached the gospel of new work. And I think that also might be something that would be great, is if we found an idea, a project that is unique to us and speaks to Stanton, that might actually be...
Swan Lake the musical.
It's got a built-in audience.
All right, so this is very exciting, I'm sure. We could give our panelists a round of applause. And as a reminder, you can see on the flyer that actually it's not a performances that start September 11th, right, Dan? It's preview.
Well, they are performances, but we call them previews because after the preview, the next day, we have a 5-hour rehearsal where we make changes based on the audience's reaction. So if jokes don't work, then they get changed and moved around. So that's new apparently to the ballet. So that's actually the fun part.
Okay, well, so we hope to see you there. And also, while I have you captive, I'll also plug that we do have, I already have a little bit, but we have 2 experienced musical choreographers. We have their ballets on our stage later this season. So we hope you not only join us for Oklahoma, but for Jerome Robbins' the centennial celebration of Jerome Robbins, as well as Justin Peck's World Premiere.
I had one thing to add too about the Jerome Robbins is that at Theater Under the Stars, the other thing that we have programmed is Jerome Robbins Broadway, which is an extension of some of the work that's being presented, and it is my passion project, and I hope you all will check that out if you're fans of Jerome Robbins. There's some great stuff in it.
Thank you for coming out, and we hope to see you soon.